Should you play Resident Evil Village in 2026? Well, I think that's a pretty easy answer, but if you have never played this, why should you give it a shot? Coming off of Resident Evil 7, which pretty much revitalized this franchise, many of us were anticipating what Capcom was going to do next with this series. Were they going to continue the story that was set in 7, or go in a different direction? Where would it take place? Who would we play as? All these questions would be answered, but let's talk about the game in a little bit more depth to see what it really offers. If you've played 7, then you know exactly what to expect. You're still playing in a first-person perspective, and the gameplay mechanics from that game return in the sequel. However, instead of fighting the molded inside of the Baker estate, you're now trapped inside this giant village in Europe. With this village, this brings different challenges than what we encountered in Louisiana. Even with that in mind, how we kill everything remains the same. The main enemies you're fighting are the Lycans, which look like werewolves, along with other creatures affected by the mold. When fighting these, you can kill them with the usual stuff like pistols, shotguns, rifles, etc. It still feels the same as well, as I couldn't tell any difference with the combat between this and 7's. Shooting each weapon still felt pretty fluid but also slow, which is a problem I mentioned in my RE7 review, so I won't rehash that, but it's still prevalent as well. To my surprise, I thought the enemies wouldn't be as annoying with their sways to dodge your attacks, but they still were, especially the Lycans. When you start the game, the Lycans will be a real pain in the ass. All you're gonna have is the pistol, and to make things worse, they're pretty tanky as well. So when shooting these guys, your safest bet is to try to get headshots, like in most RE games. Of course you can try and go for body shots, but there's no guarantee that they won't eat these shots and just tank everything. What I ended up abusing was the shotgun, just like in RE7. Once you get a hold of that, make sure to upgrade it to the max and go for headshots. You'll cause lots of damage to pretty much any enemy you go against, including the bosses, and you should be able to get through every encounter without too much trouble. Now if you were listening, I did mention something about upgrades, and thankfully the merchant does return, but this time in the form of the Duke. The Duke is a larger than life version of the merchant who offers the same services as the one from Resident Evil 4. Within his shop you're able to sell items, upgrade weapons, buy items, and cook recipes. I don't know what it is about upgrades, but having the ability to improve your weapons as the game goes on makes RE so much more fun, especially since the enemies get tougher as you progress, so being able to give yourself an advantage is definitely worth it. But what makes the system so good is that you have to earn these upgrades. Breaking crates, solving puzzles, and finding treasures pays huge dividends in this game, as by doing so you'll be able to sell them for a lot of money. It really is worth exploring every nook and cranny of the village. Talking about the village itself, I like this setting more than the Baker estate. It's not to say that the estate was bad, but being trapped in this village was only the beginning. The branching areas that housed the other lords made the entire area feel massive in scale, when in reality it was just medium sized. Then when you add in the areas that become accessible later on, the entire map really opens up. You could be in the village streets, inside the castle, within the caves, or somewhere else, but the varying locations really does make a difference in the gameplay. Not only does the environment change, the enemies do too, making every place feel separate from the other. Regarding the bosses, I really liked all the boss fights in this game. The entire concept of fighting a handful of lords affected by the mold to get to the main villain is really cool. It's the same sort of checkpoint system that's used in countless other games, but it just works. Speaking about the fights themselves, I liked all those. They were all different but offered unique challenges that made them fun to go through. If I could pick one as my favorite, it would probably be the Lady D fight. No, not because of the way she looks, but you see it, but because of just how cool the fight is. Fighting this giant winged beast upon the rooftops of the castle was just a blast. The entire fight was also really cinematic, with what happens in the cutscenes feel like you're playing through a movie. I think it's important to state that with as much action as there is at certain points, it never feels like it did in RE6. This game manages to stay within the parameters it created for itself, by keeping a fair balance of action, stealth, puzzle solving, and horror within the gameplay. Speaking of the puzzles, I like the puzzles in this a lot. Most of them weren't complicated either. For one or two of them I did have to look things up because I was stumped, but for the most part I didn't have to cheat any of the puzzles. The puzzles in this game lined up with the area and weren't just thrown in just to have one. What I really liked is the rewards you got for solving each puzzle. If it wasn't ammo, then it was valuable items that you could then sell for money. Regardless of what it was, everything was worth doing. This game did such a good job of solely giving you items that would help you unlock certain treasures, forcing you to backtrack in order to acquire all that stuff. There's a section towards the end of the game where you play as a memorable character, and that is by far my favorite part of the gameplay. What's going on during that moment is just pure chaos, and you end up going against so many enemies in such a short time. It's like the dial is turned all the way up to the max all of a sudden. And it's not normal enemies either. You fight some boss type enemies and brutes along the way. It really is a blast. Once you get to this part yourself, You'll see what I mean. In regards to the gameplay, that's pretty much it. As I already mentioned, if you play RE7, then it's about the same as that, and I think that's perfectly okay. When it comes to the story, this game's story was actually really good. On the surface, it doesn't seem like much, like another excuse to put Ethan through hell, but when you really get into it and read the notes, you see how important this story is to the overall universe. So picking up a couple years after RE7, Ethan is attempting to live a normal life with Mia and their child Rose when their house is attacked by Chris Redfield and Mia is shot dead in the process. From here is where the story starts and everything begins to unfold. However, not everything is as it seemed, as there's plenty of twists and turns that will surprise you for sure. I think the pacing for this game was done well, as the highs and lows of the game were spread out pretty well. Sure, if there was one area I could point to and say I didn't care for, it would be the Second Lord's area, but that entire area was meant to be geared towards psychological horror, so when I thought about it, it made sense. Even still, if you didn't like that, I get it. The main villain of the game, Mother Miranda, I honestly didn't care much for, but her presence is felt throughout, and once you understand her motives, everything becomes clear. You see why she did what she did, how important her decisions were, and when all of this took place. In the grand scheme of the Resident Evil universe, this game's story has actually been brewing for quite some time, even though it has never been at the forefront. If you read the notes, then you know what I mean by that statement. Regardless, I thought she was just an okay villain, but her motivations and lore behind her character was done really well. As I progressed through this story, the entire atmosphere and tone of the game shine through the cutscenes. Outside of the beginning, there was this tension that was felt throughout the entire game. Each time something happened, I didn't know if it was going to have good or bad consequences. Like, I was sitting there, cheeks clenched the entire time, praying that Ethan would be okay. By the time I rolled credits, I was highly satisfied with what Capcom cooked up for this title. I thought it was memorable for sure. Overall, Resident Evil Village is a really good game. I enjoyed every aspect of it and felt like they took everything in 7 and built upon it just enough to allow the game to stand on its own. Sure, the enemies are still tanky and swaying these weird movements, but other than that, there isn't anything that made me really hate my time playing this. So to answer the question, should you play Resident Evil Village in 2026? I would say absolutely. This game is so much fun, and if you like RE7 or past RE games, then you should enjoy this. If I had to give this game a score, I'd give it a 9. What did you think about Resident Evil Village? Have you played this game before, or are you hearing about this for the first time? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.